So yeah, a little bit about myself. I'm Moritz Dan. I founded and sold 2 online gaming companies when I was 17 until I was 23. Last 2 years I worked at SoundCloud in their growth team as a growth PM. And I now, 2 months ago, I actually set up my own mobile growth consultancy firm, Feature. Some of the apps I work with, you might have a couple of them installed. SoundCloud, Clue, Period Tracker, OneFootball, so a really wide range of different apps. Since I always say always be testing, I wanted to practice what I preach and run a little experiment with all of you. And please get your mobile devices out if you haven't so already. I'm not getting paid for this, but I want to kind of see if it's possible to create a trending search with the audience that we have here in the Apple App Store and the Google Play Store. So if you could search for the keyword football and then download the OneFootball app. So they currently rank in the UK around 7 or 8. I want to see if we can get some results and get them maybe on, for position 3. I'm not sure. I'll share some insights on that in a day or 2. So yeah, today I'm going to talk a little bit more about strategic mobile growth, why you want to set up a growth team and how you set it up. Then the mobile growth stack, a framework that my former colleague Andy Carvel and I developed to kind of have a bit more of a bird's eye view on what you can be doing, and then how you go from the growth stack to actual experimentation. So I often get this question, why do I need a growth team? Everyone in the company affects growth, and that is true. I mean, your customer support, your product, your marketing, and even indirectly, I mean, finance and legal are also affecting your growth, or at least making it possible. But the growth team has this laser-sharp focus on growth. They have basically 2 tasks. They have to understand how your app is growing, and then drive growth through obsessive experimentation. It's important to equip them with a North Star metric, so not downloads or MAU, but really something that matters to your business. So at SoundCloud we used listening time, Airbnb uses nights booked, and the growth team of Airbnb can then say, okay, the biggest opportunity in the next 3 months lays in acquiring more users, or actually in trying to re-engage with churned users. Composition of the growth team, also really important that you have growth-minded PMs and engineers, data analysts, and designers in that growth team, because for people in the growth team, it's not about building great, beautiful products or having a long-term horizon. They want to leverage what you already have in the app and kind of want to pick out and experiment on those existing features. So what I do with the teams I work with is weekly meetings. We have a short 10 minutes interval where we have search for external factors like an App Store featuring or a piece of content that went trending to identify kind of how the app has been growing in the last week, and then spend most of the time, 15 minutes or so, on actually analyzing or discussing analyzed experiments and upcoming experiments. So at SoundCloud, we actually did a lot of the things that you will see here on this the growth stack, but we didn't really have a good framework of identifying what we were doing, and also really important, what we were not doing. You don't have to do everything on this stack, but the idea is that it gives you an understanding of identifying your biggest opportunities. So my colleague Andy Carvel, he created the mobile growth stack, I think around 1.5 years ago, and we started iterating on that together, and this is the last version we published in November. And the idea behind the growth stack is that it's funded on a really strong layer of analytics and insights. Before you actually start experimenting with acquisition or engagement and retention or even monetization, you have to have a really good framework in place for install attribution, A/B testing. You have to know how to look at cohorts. I don't have time to go through all of these boxes today. But yeah, you have to have a good understanding of where your users are coming from and how they are behaving in your app. And if you move kind of into the more, the experimentation mode of the stack, it's built up in 3 layers: acquisition, engagement and retention, and monetization. And I'll walk with you through a couple of examples that I think are cool, but they are not necessarily good for your app. So it's just kind of to get you in the growth mindset of what you could be looking at. So in terms of acquisition, you have the traditional acquisition PR where you go to TechCrunch or, I don't know, a news outlet and pitch your new cool feature that's coming up. But you can also, a lot of apps are sitting on a bunch of interesting data of their users, and they can aggregate that data and then kind of have a PR-driven data strategy. Like Tinder had this, they published this blog post, I think, a couple of weeks ago, about the most right-swiped jobs for women, and that got picked up like in more than 100 news outlets. So for them, a great acquisition strategy. Apps optimization is something I'm really fond of, so I always try. That's also why I wanted to run that experiment. I do a lot with keyword optimization and leveraging tricks like in the UK App Store, you can also be found for your keywords from Australian English. So basically, doubling your keyword opportunity there. Of course, A/B testing conversion of your assets in the store, in the Play Store. Rating optimization. What we did with SoundCloud is basically had an NPS campaign and asked users to give us a score from 0 to 10, and then asked the promoters to actually rate us in the App Store, and had a great impact from that. Also increasingly important is off-page optimization. So Google Search basically has their own App Store. Content marketing might work for some apps. So this is a food delivery app. They do a lot with content marketing. And the idea is there that they get a lot of, actually by writing great content, get a lot of people landing on their content, and they have an upsell into their app. And if you look at a strategy like that, then, and this is where I come to the channels, because previously push notifications used to be a retention strategy, but it's not so much the tactic, but it's just one of the channels you can have a lifecycle marketing campaign running on. But you have to find for every campaign, whether it's paid performance, you have to find the right mix of channels that works for your app. If it's content marketing, and that works really well on your blog, maybe also try to push that content to Medium or LinkedIn. Distribution deals. Not everyone can seal these deals with pre-installs. But for some apps that really works well, like Opera, they are pre-installed on millions and millions of devices. But you can also think of traffic exchange. So basically partner up with another app and that has the same audience as you, and kind of could be a complementary feature. And you can partner up with that app and to do some cross-selling. Virality, everyone knows kind of the classic example of Facebook and LinkedIn, but SoundCloud and OneFootball actually are way more about content virality, so content sharing. OneFootball, they ask if you view a match, they ask you to predict who will win, and have a beautiful, basically sharing experience to Facebook and Twitter of your prediction. And that in turn gives you a lot of actually users coming to your mobile website or a website, but you have to be really aggressive on your cross-sell. Like that traffic is often really, really transient. They come by for one pin, view one, or listen to one track on SoundCloud. You will want to have them in the native experience. So you have to test around with kind of what works for your app. Pinterest growth team, I really always appreciate. They have a really aggressive upsell into their app, and they've tested around with that a lot. Over-the-air installs, if you sign up on web with a Google account, that you can actually have the app installed right away on your Nexus device, works also well as an acquisition play. Increasingly important is also app indexing. So if you search for a hotel right now in London, Hotel Tonight would show up because Google knows that they have that content in their indexed in their app. But of course, that's also good for retention. If you have 2 months ago, I made a fluffy buttermilk pancake recipe, and now whenever I search for pancakes, that recipe shows up in my search and links me straight into the Kitchen Stories app. And then if we move one layer down into the stack, you have engagement and retention. And I guess we all know this curve, retention, average retention curve for Android apps. It's a bit better for iOS. But what I see a lot of companies try to do is kind of re-engage after 30 days. It's really, really hard, and we experienced this with SoundCloud. It's really hard to get their attention back, and you can't do a lot with those users anyway, because you have to kind of go out with a really lame, generic, hey, we miss you message. What you will want to do is really focus in the growth team on your onboarding experience and try to kind of, you see the biggest drop-off happens in day one, and actually in the first kind of the golden minute, as they call it. So you will want to look at your onboarding, and for some apps, tutorial mode might work, but for other apps, I'm not sure. You probably all experience this when you download an app and you get 5 to 10 of these onboarding screens. You just flick through them, and this happens to me a lot as well. And then I don't get the value prop, or I missed this little feature that we're actually communicating in their onboarding experience. So what Lookout do is they force you to get the value proposition by asking. It's a pretty lame question, but it really kind of, they ask, you lost your phone, what do you do? A, panic, or B, located on from lookout.com. So they really make sure that the user gets what the app is for. Contextual onboarding, so Dubsmash, they grew in a year to 100 million MAU. They have a great viral flow, a lot of content being shared, but they want to kind of have if I share this content with a friend and they don't have Dubsmash installed, they will want to land right into kind of that piece of content, and they don't want to go through account setup, or they really need to see the value prop of the share in a matter of seconds. So they kind of fingerprint users before they go into the App Store with branch metrics, and they let the user land on that piece of content after they opened up the app for the first time. User accounts, Google Translate doesn't need them, but a lot of apps do. Also experiment with that, whether or not having a limited anonymous experience is good for having engaged users. Maybe you have a deferred account creation where you, after a couple of actions or sessions, you will require account creation. But if you do it, if you have an account model, then do it right. Make sure that you have the sign up with Facebook and Google Flow, and maybe Twitter is the way to go for your app. And also what Slack do is really, really cool is that you don't have to enter your complete password again. And for a lot of apps, I wouldn't go through the hassle after I haven't used it for a month to reset my password or recover my password. I would just click the app away and deinstall it. In terms of lifecycle marketing, of course, be relevant, be personalized at the right time and on the right channel. Maybe SMS is working really great for Facebook are using SMS increasingly to get users to that aha moment. And really important, we heard this today as well. I mean, you can only send so many push notifications if you have super low opt-in rates. So make sure that you communicate that value prop before you actually trigger the system dialog. Monetization, of course, super exciting, but I won't have time for that today, but it's covered in a lot of talks anyway. So I wanted to quickly talk a little bit about these 3 boxes that sit on the side of the stack, and that's because they cut through all the 3 funnels, through acquisition, engagement and retention, and monetization funnel. International, of course, retargeting as well, but for partnerships, I wanted to talk a little bit more about that because I think that's a really exciting opportunity for a lot of apps. You have, of course, partnerships, more classical BD partnerships where you have to do a lot of prep work and actually do a custom integration. But here maps, what they do is they integrate with Get Your Guide, so they get all the points of interest from Get Your Guide. So I'm based in Berlin, but now I'm here for a couple of days in London, so I'll definitely open up the Here Maps app and check out a couple of sightseeing points, but Get Your Guide gets install traffic from actually being implemented with Here Maps. For some apps that doesn't work as well, so or kind of going through, if you're having a really small startup yet, maybe a big contract like that isn't as easy. But you can also tie in with existing integrations like Facebook Messenger. They're really pushing their Messenger platform forward. And I guess this is still the right time to get in there and kind of try to lift on the effectiveness of that channel. Giphy got really big with that, Dubsmash as well. So basically they make their content shareable to the Messenger platform and get install buttons in return. And also be looking always, and we heard this a couple of times today, is that channels become less effective over time. And that's what you see on the graph on the right by James Currier. And I guess that's something Zynga hasn't done really well, is they grew really on top of kind of with their pretty annoying Farmville notifications. That Facebook was a great acquisition strategy channel for them, but they couldn't find channels to replace that with, because of course that Facebook at some point changed the algorithm that it wasn't so effective anymore. Right, and if you kind of take the stack, and this is what I do with my couple of my clients, is that we analyze, but you can do this for yourself as well, analyze every 3 to 6 months, is kind of how you're performing against each of these boxes. Some of them you won't have to tick. Merchandising might just not fit your app, and just color them gray, but you will also want to kind of get a read on based on new competitors that are out there, or things that your existing competitors are doing with launching new features. Have that one break every 6 months, and also look at best practices. Maybe 3D touch is now not such a great engagement thing because it's still a super low adoption rate, but 6 months down the line it actually might be a great way to engage with your users. Same for the channels, I talked a little bit about that already, but also as a growth team, be aware of your own product roadmap so that you can go back to your onboarding and make sure that new features are reflected in your onboarding, but also that you communicate this with your mobile marketing automation tool to existing users, that they see and adopt new features that you launch. Of course, if you have cool features coming up in your product roadmap, you will want to pitch to Apple and Google as well. And then kind of let everyone in the company and maybe externals input in your experimentation backlog idea. Make it super simple, I always advise. Like just have a backlog of 100 ideas. Where probably a 2-hour brainstorm will already get you more than that. And then have the growth team prioritize and score those ideas. So what I like to do always with the growth team growth teams I'm working with is identify impact, confidence over that impact, and you will get better over time by looking at the right industry benchmarks, but also the ease, considering the resources that you have in your growth team, the ease of actually executing on that experiment. And then out of that comes an average score and makes it really super simple to kind of pick the quick wins and the things that you should be working on right now. And those are the things you then convert into experiment cards. Owner, objective, hypothesis, of course. But then way more important than that is the analysis, right? So you will want to see results. But even more important than the results of that siloed experiment is the learnings and the action items you get from that. So if, for example, if you change the messaging on your Google Play screenshots and A/B test that and see that the new messaging actually reflects way better with your users, then go back as well to your onboarding flow and throughout your product to adapt it there as well. And then last but not least, majority of your experiments will fail. And with fail, I mean a lot of them will be inconclusive, just not moving the needle. But it's really about the compounded growth you can get from a 0.5% increase in retention, but also from the learnings of the things that you tried and it didn't work. Yeah, I rushed through this, I realize, but thanks so much. If you have any questions, now is the time, or in the break. And yeah, if you haven't done so already, please go through that to the App Store and search for football to download the app, because I think only if everyone does it, might actually be picked up as a trending search. That would be really, really cool. But
I was interested in what you said about user accounts, retention, and sign-ups. Do you have any observations about lessening friction?
Yeah, so I work with different companies that saw completely different results, and it really depends on the app you have. I work with Here Maps, and for them, a mapping app has less value prop for the user than for example, SoundCloud, music platform. To actually force users to create an account. So there's always, you have to balance that, and you have to keep experimenting. Actually at SoundCloud we did introduce an anonymous experience on iOS, and what we saw, yes, there was an uplift in MAU, but no, they weren't as engaged, the anonymous users weren't as engaged with the product. So you have to find that right balance.
Any observations on sort of the difficulties you've had putting together multidisciplinary growth teams in companies? Because I've seen that can be quite painful. Any sort of thoughts on how to go about that process?
So at SoundCloud we actually organized around metrics. We had basically we had four growth PMs. We had acquisition, activation, and retention. And then international, which was the team I was leading, was kind of more organized around a feature. That worked well, but yeah, you have to kind of regroup with the whole organization so that you make sure that kind of the retention PM doesn't get upset when the acquisition PM does a burst campaign and brings in all kinds of incentivized, low engaged traffic, right? So there's always a balance to be struck there, so it's really good to have kind of a head of growth who kind of combines that into a North Star metric.
Cool. All right. Thank you very much, Moritz.